Morning, dear children. Welcome back again. Children, we will first recap what all we did in our previous class. Children, we read about the author Jerome K. Jerome. We also dealt with how the author, along with his friends, decided to visit an island, the Magna Carta Island, which is situated in the edge of the River Thames in United Kingdom. We also studied how they managed to build up a tent and what all difficulties they faced to build up a tent. Children, if you remember, we also dealt with how they struggled to prepare the tea. Children, now let's start the remaining portion of the lesson to find out what all they did in the second part of the lesson.
Alright, children, open your book Oxford Inc. English Reader Part A, page number 58. Let's read, children. We adopted this harmless bit of trickery, and the result was that by the time everything else was ready, the tea was waiting. Then we lit the lantern and squatted down to supper. We wanted that supper. For 5:30 not a sound was heard throughout the length and breadth of that boat, save the clank of cutlery and crockery, and the steady grinding of 4 sets of molars. At the end of 5:30, Harris said, "Ah," and took his left leg out from under him and put his right one there instead. 5 minutes afterwards, George said, "Ah," too, and threw his plate out on the bank. And 3 minutes later than that, Montmorency gave the first sign of contentment he had exhibited since we had started, and rolled over on his side and spread his legs out. And then I said, "Ah," and bent my head back and bumped it against one of the hoops, but I did not mind it. I did not even swear. So, children, all the three friends had their supper for 5:30, that is approximately 35 minutes. They heartily had their stomach fill for more than half an hour. The sound of only cutlery, crockery, and grinding of molars could be heard. 5 minutes afterwards, George threw his plate out on the bank, and 3 minutes later, Montmorency also sighed of contentment and rolled over his side. The author states that one feels so good when one's hunger is satisfied. Now let's read page number 57, the second paragraph. How good one feels when one is full, how satisfied with ourselves and with the world. People who have tried it tell me that a clear conscience makes you very happy and contented. But a full stomach does the business quite as well and is cheaper and more easily obtained. One feels so forgiving and generous after a substantial and well digested meal, so noble minded, so kindly hearted. We are but the sorriest slaves of our stomach. It is very strange, this domination of our intellect by our digestive organs. We cannot work, we cannot think unless our stomach wills so. It dictates to us our emotions, our passions. After eggs, it says work. After a thick slice of meat, it says sleep. After a cup of tea, 2 spoonfuls for each cup, and don't let it stand more than 3 minutes, it says to the brain, now rise and show your strength. After hot muffins, it says, be dull and soulless, like a beast of the field, a brainless animal with listless eye, unlit by any ray of fancy, or of hope, or fear, or love, or life. Children, we just now discussed, the author states that one feels so good when one's hunger is satisfied. It feels like being contented with ourselves and the world. One can think clearly as a hearty meal makes one happy and able to do business well. One also feels forgiving and generous, noble minded and kind hearted after a substantial meal. Children, here the author points out that humans are the sorriest slaves of their stomach. Our digestive organs control our intellect. On a hungry stomach, a person cannot work, cannot think. It also dictates our emotions and passions. When we eat light food, we are capable of work, but on a heavy diet, we slumber to sleep. But tea acts as a magic. It shrugs away laziness and gives us strength to work. Hot muffins, on the other hand, have their own story. It makes the mind dull and soulless, like a beast of the field. Alright, children, now let's see the fourth paragraph. Before our supper, Harris and George and I were quarrelsome and snappy and ill tempered. After our supper, we sat and beamed on one another, and we beamed upon the dog too. Children, here beamed means smiled cheerfully and happily. Alright. We loved each other. We loved everybody. Harris, in moving about, trod on George's corn. Had this happened before supper, George would have expressed wishes and desires concerning Harris' fate in this world, and the next that would have made a thoughtful man shudder. As it was, he said, "Steady, old man, wear wheat." So, children, Harris, Jerome, and George were snappy and quarrelsome before supper. They were ill tempered too, but a substantial meal induced happiness in them, and they sat beaming with one another. They also were forgiving towards each other and expressed their concern as well. Now, let us read the last paragraph. And Harris, instead of merely observing in his most unpleasant tones that a fellow could hardly help treading on some bit of George's foot if he had to move about at all within 10 yards of where George was sitting, suggesting that George never ought to come into an ordinary sized boat with feet that length, and advising him to hang them over the side as he would have done before supper. Now said, "Oh, I am so sorry, old chap. I hope I haven't hurt you." And George said, "Not at all. That it was his fault." And Harris said, "No, it was his." It was quite pretty to hear them. Harris and George showed affection and concern for each other, and unlike what they were previously quarrelsome and irritated on an empty stomach, now each was apologetic of his own behavior. It was pity enough to see their reconciliation. Alright, children, so here we have finished with our chapter. I hope everyone must have understood it. I will be meeting you again with my next video. Till then, children, take very good care of yourself. Thank you. Goodbye.